hope you enjoy this special episode today with Spencer. So this was a joint episode. This is his interview number 100 for his project and my episode 20. So please check out his content. I'll leave the link in the description below. Guys, if you could please subscribe, comment and share and like all the content, I really appreciate that. Hopefully in the next week I'll be doing a live episode with Santiago, and it will be more of a Q&A storytelling type podcast. So if you can leave any questions that you have in the comments, that we can go on the episode. Other than that, I hope you have a happy holidays and a happy new year. Hello everyone, this is episode 20 of Backpacks and Stories. I'm here today with Spencer.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. You have just arrived back in LA.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I just flew in from the Dominican Republic last night after about a year in South and Central America, and I'm really happy to be back.
Nice. And what were you doing down there?
Oh, lots of interesting things. I volunteered for a few months. I was a teacher. That's where we met in Chinchina, Colombia. And I led an English school down there for about 5 months. I'm also doing an interview project called Love John Cooper, where I interviewed 49 people from Guatemala down to Argentina. So a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really cool. That I had no idea that you were doing this project until I saw your social media and then found out that we would. I mean, the projects are different. I think yours are shorter interviews with people. But we're doing the same kind of thing, just talking to people and seeing their perspectives on the world.
Yeah, we also both speak Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
We were born in February.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the nose ring quite yet, but maybe that too.
And how did your project start in the first place?
Well, it's kind of a long story. But when I was a younger kid, and even in high school, I always felt like a little bit socially awkward. Like I didn't have too many friends. It was sort of hard for me to connect. And I always felt like I sort of was a bit not the most polished socially. So when I was 24, my friend Grayson Holiday gave me a book called The Hero Within. And it said to be a really heroic person, to be your best possible self, you have to present yourself socially on this social path of the world. Mm-hmm. And so that led me to the idea of universal brotherhood. What does it mean to live in universal brotherhood with other people? And one day I took some magical mushrooms with my friend Grayson. We walked around Asheville, North Carolina. I encountered a drag queen named Priscilla Chambers and just asked, "Can I interview you?" I'd never interviewed anyone before. I didn't really know what I was doing, but Priscilla agreed. The next day I went down to this drag show. And ever since then, I've been interviewing people for Universal Brotherhood and your interview 100. But if I could, it's interesting because we have some commonalities in how our project started. How did your project start? Like, when did you get the idea to talk to everyone like this?
Well, it's something similar. I mean, I also feel like I was kind of a weirdo in school. But people have always interested me. I have a mom who's a psychologist, so you can imagine what that does to a child. Interested in people is what I mean by that. And I've always been very fascinated by Louis Theroux. I don't know if you're familiar. You have some documentaries to watch, my friend. He has created some. He's inspired me a lot, the way that he asks questions and the way that he talks to people. Such an interesting character, and seeing that kind of content made me interested me about the world, the kind of people who are out there, and yeah, just so he was an inspiration. But I wanted to start this project. I wanted to start a podcast 6 years ago, we'll call it. And when I started traveling 5 years ago, I felt like I was building up the momentum to do it. But again, I'd never interviewed anyone, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen until this year. Um, and this year, when I came here and I was here in a more stable place, it was time to get started. It was time to get started, and I finally did back in July.
Well, congratulations. Yeah, I know you're, I'm interview number 20.
Interview number 20, yes.
Oh, I'm sure you've learned a lot talking to all these different people. Like, I think you do a really good job of getting people from, well, I'm the first person from the United States, but like the UK, Argentina, China, Malaysia. So it's cool how you have such a big like network of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's somewhat of a duty that we have to spend time with people from other cultures and learn what we can. Um, and as you might have seen, I have different relationships with all of these people, varying from someone that I met very briefly. I had a 20-minute conversation with, to then having an hour and a half conversation with them here. So I'm getting to know them in that moment. And then I have other friends, like last week, it was Danny, who I grew up with in school. He's one of my oldest friends, you know, but he's someone who hasn't traveled so much. So to see everyone's different perspectives about the world and sometimes bringing up old memories is it's been really cool.
It's interesting. I think both of our projects have that in common. Just lots of different people from different backgrounds.
Hmm.
Like I've interviewed very wealthy people. I've interviewed people from really big cities, but I've also interviewed quite a few homeless people. I've interviewed people in South America, Central America, New York, or not New York, Toronto, North America, South America. And it's really interesting to see the commonalities, the differences. Like, what does a 21-year-old girl from La Paz, Bolivia, have in common with a 63-year-old guy, monolingual from Toronto? It's interesting to see what we have in common and what we don't.
The things that draw us together and the things that push us apart. And sorry, I'm just I want some clarification because you told me before that you started this project going from North Carolina going back to LA, right? The first 50 interviews.
Yes, sir. So the way it started is I read that book from Grayson, and I did a meditation. What does it mean for me to connect socially? What is my social role? And the idea of universal brotherhood, just like a revelation came into my mind. And after interviewing Priscilla, I got a tarot card reading, which is a very Asheville, North Carolina thing to do. And the woman said, like, oh, you're going to have to go on a journey of some kind. And on this journey, you're going to have lots of different color threads that are going to make you bring you to the cups, which is like emotional fulfillment. And so, yeah, I had interviewed like 8 or 9 of my friends in Asheville, a few comedians who agreed for me to take their picture and they would do an interview with me. I got really lucky in finding Khalid Latif, who's the chaplain for NYU and a pretty famous guy in his own right. So just coincidentally, or by God's providence, I was able to interview about 9 or 10 interesting people. And I had lived in Arkansas. My brother lived in Colorado. I went to school in Arizona. And so there was just like this very natural belt where I could go from
Yeah.
North Carolina here back to LA. And yeah, I was on the Greyhound bus. So I interviewed some people on the bus. I stayed with my friends Sam and Matt when they were doing a marathon in Little Rock, which was really cool.
Hmm.
I found some really interesting communities in Denver, like the International Church of Cannabis. In Las Vegas, I talked to someone working to advocate for sex workers. I talked to someone who did sex work. So I've just talked to a bunch of different people. And the first 50 interviews ended in Canada. I was in a Buddhist community for 2 months meditating, interviewed the monk from that, and then came back home. So that was the first 50.
Also, but you did some in Mexico as well, right?
Yeah, so what happened is I got to 50 interviews, which was the goal. Perfect. But 5 of the interviews were like corrupted or I couldn't use the files. But it's interesting. It's like you said, your project was sort of delayed. Like you wanted to do this for 4 or 5, 6 years. Um, I thought I was done, but it was probably a blessing in disguise that those interviews were lost because it allowed me to go to Mexico City and do some interviews in Spanish. So it was actually a good thing.
Hmm.
How do you think about that with your own projects, like your timetable? Like, I know you said you wanted to start a few years ago, but you're just starting now.
Well, I mentioned it to you before that it has felt frustrating in some ways. It felt very frustrating that there have been lots of spurs of energy that I've had throughout these years, and I say frustrating in the sense of Australia would have been a really amazing opportunity, living in hostels all the time, constantly meeting new people. But I think I understood and I came to terms with that I wasn't ready to start the project then. So sometimes we can't force things, and we shouldn't force things. And it felt like more of a natural start now, So I think for whatever reason, I didn't get it started. I started now at the right time.
Hmm. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. Now that you have some permanence, like being in Montreal for a minute, it gives you the capacity to sit down, talk to people, upload with like a fairly consistent schedule. So it's cool that you're doing it. Congrats on making it to interview number 20.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I wanted to ask as well, how do you feel? Do you feel like there's a different dynamic doing the interviews in Spanish and English?
Well, it's kind of interesting because lots of my interviews are only 2 minutes long, 5 minutes long. The interviews themselves aren't, super long runtime, but lots of these people I've spent 2 or 3 days with leading up to the actual interview itself. And so every interview is different, right?
Mhm.
Like talking to Bryce, who is my friend in Asheville, North Carolina, uh, who I've known for about 6 months at that time, is much different than talking to a street performer in La República Dominicana and just getting the interview pretty much on spot.
Mhm.
English is my first language. And so I feel I'm almost more fluid in how I process the questions or how I think about things. And there's so many Spanish dialects that it's happened once or twice where I've done a Spanish interview and then had to listen to their answers 2 or 3 times to really understand the connotation of the words and the context that they're talking about.
Mhm.
So I think that's a thing. But the project's for Universal Brotherhood, and I almost feel more proud after doing interviews in Spanish because it's like, oh, I'm a foreigner in a different country talking to people in their language. How cool is that?
Mhm.
A little challenge though is I've started to talk to people in different languages, like indigenous Mayan languages, Cachiquel, Tuchuquil. I have interviews in those. And sort of presents a interesting problem to solve going forward. Like, I would love to get someone speaking Japanese or Italian or French. How do I do that if I don't speak those languages?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But you're referring to a person who only speaks those languages. They don't speak any English. For you to be able to ask the questions in English and them to respond in their language.
Well, we'll see. English and Spanish are really the only languages I feel comfortable or I had the potential to do interviews in. I have a little bit of French,
Mhm.
um, but not enough to ask the question itself. So, um, luckily, everyone I've spoken to has either spoken English well enough to answer in another language, or they speak Spanish well enough to answer in a native language or an indigenous language. So,
Mhm.
it's for that reason that North America and South America sort of had to be the first places to go, just because I knew I could speak those languages really well. And even the people who spoke in Portuguese, for example, I just asked them the questions in Spanish and they were able to answer in Portuguese.
Mhm. Portuñol always works. Well, most of the time. I'm curious though, with the interviews where the people are responding in another language, do you have translations for those? How does it work?
Well, luckily, everyone I spoke to who did a different language also spoke Spanish. And so, if they answered well, for example, when I was in Paraguay, Asunción, there was a woman who responded in Guarani, which is the most common indigenous language down there. And so I didn't understand what she was saying. And even though she gave me the translations in Spanish, I still was like, well, I'm probably missing something, not hearing her in her native language. But I had spoken to somebody at a museum who was fluent in Guarani. So I just sent her the recording and she translated it to me, and sent it to me. So there's, in the moment, I'm sort of missing something because I don't really fully comprehend what the other person's saying. But in a sense, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is the human connection itself. And sort of like you've done a really cool job of talking to people from China and the Middle East and South America. And well, I'm your first person from the United States, but hey, he got me too. It's interesting to talk to people from such a wide variety of places.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And that is a goal that one day I would like to have done an interview with someone from every country in the world.
Oh, cool. Oh, well, here's a question. I know that Spanish is really near and dear to your heart. And from what I remember, you have a really high Spanish level. Have you ever thought about like doing an interview in Spanish, or is like somebody presented that to you?
You know, I would like to as one day make a Spanish podcast as well. In terms of doing it as like just a one-off episode, it could be interesting, but I think about that as more of a project down the road a little bit.
Oh, I see. So, well, it's interesting too, because with the videos I do in Spanish, I do subtitles in English. Just because English is it's the global language,
Yes.
right? Every country I've gone to, somebody speaks English, someone wants to speak English. And so it's almost more important that you have the interviews in English so people, in podcast form could understand what was being said. Whereas if it's just in Spanish, it's really only Spanish speakers who can then understand it.
Which is still a big audience as well. It's a very big audience. But yes, it is something that I'm conscious of, and because I do feel a big connection to the language. I think I would like to make a project in that language because I feel like it is something that I would like to share with my Latin friends as well who don't speak English, because I do have a lot of people in my life who don't speak any English. So to be able to share something with them too, it would be nice to do one day for sure. So I wanted to ask as well, which state are you from? Are you from Arizona? Are you from California? Are you from a different state?
Technically, I'm from a place called Huntington Beach, California,
Okay.
which is in Orange County. But when I go around the world, it's just a lot easier to say Los Angeles because I was born in Los Angeles County. It has like sort of a cachet and name recognition. So where are you from? Orange County. Where are you from? Los Angeles. Wow. So I usually just say LA, Southern California.
I feel like Orange County is reasonably well known as well.
It is it? That's interesting because I usually just say Los Angeles going around, but sometimes I ask myself, like, would people know Orange County? And I think in the English speaking world, most people do.
I think there's definitely some pop culture references to it, enough in, like you say, in the English speaking world that is possible. But I don't see you as, you're not the typical LA kind of person, you know?
Nice. Is that a compliment? Is that a
I would definitely take it as like, well, I mean, when I say that, I mean like very. You think LA, you think Hollywood, you think everything made up, you think of everything very unnatural, everything kind of forced, I guess. And you're not that person at all. So yeah, I would say that's a compliment. But not anything against those people specifically. People can live the lives that they want to live, but yeah.
well, it's interesting because my dad's from Ohio and
Hmm.
my mom's from New Jersey. So different influences there. And I have lived in some other places. I lived in Arizona for 4 years. So when I was 18, I moved to a different state for school. And then I lived in the south of the United States in North Carolina and Arkansas for 3 years. And then I worked in a very, very Latino community where the school, as a teacher, where the school population was like, 95% Latino. So even though I'm from Orange County, which has a certain, or LA, which has a certain reputation, a lot of my professional life and a lot of my own choices as a person have been to be like in Latin America or different communities. And I've picked up something from everywhere, like yes, sir, no, sir, how are y'all doing? Which is Southern ways of speaking. I sort of use that a lot nowadays. And same thing in the South and Central American world. I feel like lots of the expressions I use, like Argentina, che, hola che, ¿cómo está la lluvia? Stuff like that. But
Yeah.
also chévere and bacana, which are things from Colombia. So it's interesting how you sort of pick up a little place. You pick up little parts of the places you've been.
100%. What is it that draws you to Latin America?
Well, I guess there's like three different answers, but I'll go with the deep, interesting one. So like when I was younger, I didn't have too many friends, and I sort of felt like a bit of a weirdo in middle school, high school. But I found that I had sort of an aptitude for language. And when people heard that I could speak Spanish, or I had like a cool little, more so than most gringos could, there was a certain level of acceptance. And in college, three of my best friends came from Spanish-speaking families. And one day, my friend Angel Ortega told me, "Hey, let's go down to Mexico for a wedding, like of his friend's cousin." I was like, "Oh, sure." And so I go to this wedding, and it was such a cool cultural experience. It was really my first time in a Spanish-speaking country, and just like the level of acceptance and hospitality. And I stayed with his parents, and there was just so much openness. I'm like, wow, this is really cool, huh? And that inspired me to go to Costa Rica when I was 21 for a summer. And I just sort of continued down that path where it's like I learned more of the language, so I was accepted more. So I learned more pura vida, tuanis, my, all that. So it's sort of like this positive reinforcement.
Yep.
And then when I was in the rural South, no one else could speak Spanish, so they made me be the Spanish teacher, and it just sort of followed. I love the language. I think it's a beautiful language. And it's such a diverse, South and Central America is so diverse and so many cool things are going on there. But you know that after living in like Colombia and Argentina and having so many Latino friends yourself.
What are the other two less cool answers?
Oh, the less cool answers?
Yeah.
It's like, there's the 20-second answer, the 2-minute answer, the 2-hour answer. So the 20-second answer is, oh, Spanish is a really cool language. The second answer is, oh, I'm from Los Angeles, and so many people speak Spanish. You just sort of naturally pick it up. But the third one's the most personal and therefore the most cool. But how about you? I know you said that like in your hometown in the UK, there aren't many Latino people. With my story, most of the kids I went to high school with spoke Spanish. How did you come into the language?
Yeah, it's very true that I'm really trying to rack my brain to think if I knew a Spanish speaker in my time and living in the UK in the 20 years that I lived there, but I really can't think of anyone. I remember there was one girl who, I don't know, maybe she came from a Spanish family potentially, but I knew her for like 1 year in school, and then she went to another school. So, but there's really not so much Latin influence in the UK. At least maybe in London, there is a lot more, but no one that I knew. So it wasn't until I started traveling a little bit around in Europe. I think I met a few Mexicans, and then in Southeast Asia, before I went to Australia, I started to meet some Argentinians. And then when I go to Australia, in every hostel, there were Chilenos and Argentinos everywhere, every day. So there's always been a big Latin community in Australia, people doing the working holiday visa. And I just found myself with a lot of those people, seeing how bright and bubbly they are, and interesting and kind. Most of my good friends that I made in Australia were Latinos. So I was planning on going back to Australia, but the plan changed. And then I said I wanted to go to South America for such a long time. So I'm going to do it. And then I went and saw some old friends, made a lot of new friends, and I just fell in love with the continent. Just such an amazing continent, South America.
Did you start in Buenos Aires? Because I was there for 2 months. It's such a magical city.
I started in Santiago de Chile, and after it was about after 3 or 4 weeks that I ended up in Buenos Aires. But I've been to Buenos Aires 4 times. I love it too. It's my favorite city that I visited in the world.
No, I was in Buenos Aires. I was supposed to be there for like 3 weeks, but I liked it so much that I stayed for 2 months. And I was in Santiago de Chile too. I don't know what your experience was in Santiago. My phone was stolen there,
Your phone?
unfortunately. It's a little bitter taste in my mouth. But no, both cities fantastic. But there's something so special about Buenos Aires. It's like the architecture is so shockingly pretty. There's such a cool music scene. The food's so good. Corrientes, you can go to like this awesome play for like $8. Like, super recommend. Thumbs up. I love Buenos Aires.
Best city in the world. And what were you doing there?
There was a language academy that I was in charge of. There was working professionals in the city, like people who wanted to be airplane attendants or people who were working in tourism, and I was their English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
But I would think of a slightly Argentinian accent because I also took super intensive Spanish lessons when I was there. So like 4 hours a day, I was reading Borges, Cortázar. I was speaking in Spanish with the vosotros and everything, and just exploring the city. I mean, going to like La Puente de la Mujer over by the new city is such a fantastic thing. There's so many tourists in the city. The nightlife is like, I think it's the first time in my life I went out and I was out until 6 in the morning in Buenos Aires, just because it's so nocturnal. They're always doing something. So yeah. Well, what do you remember most about Buenos Aires? Did you have any like favorite spots or like favorite things to do?
To be honest, I just love walking around the city and seeing what the day has to offer, going and meeting friends. I mean, obviously, I was just there as a tourist, and sometimes it coincides that my friends are there on holidays. Sometimes they're there working. So, but I love walking around the parks, and like you mentioned, the architecture, the food. I feel like is one of the most accepting cities for vegetarians and vegans. Definitely the best in South America, if not maybe the world, one of the best in the world. I think it's really, really up there.
Yeah, I can't think of any vegetarian restaurants in Chinchina or rural Nicaragua, so you might be onto something there.
It was difficult, that was for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There's always a way. There's always a way, but sometimes you have to pay the same or more and you get less food because they give you the plate but without the meat, without the protein, and then they charge you the same price for it, which isn't, in my books, that's not fair, but it is what it is.
No, I have a friend in Chinchina who's a vegetarian, and I was talking to her. I think there's only one vegetarian restaurant, but it's in Manizales, so it's not even in Chinchina. It's like the next big city over. To find like a place anyway.
Manizales and Pereira there's about 4 or 5 veggie restaurants in each of those places. There are options there, but in Chinchina, no. Not yet. Not yet.
One day.
It might be a big ask, but hopefully one day, yeah. Yeah. So, what did you study in university in Arizona?
Well, I had something that was an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary major. The official title's philosophy, politics, and law. So as opposed to studying one thing specifically, it's sort of more like I had four concentrations or minors. So economics, political science, philosophy. Um, I mostly studied those three things. And then I had a minor in English literature. So
Okay.
it was a combination of things. I think I'm really glad that I did that course or that like field of study, because like it's hard for me just to concentrate on one thing. I like having lots of different things, lots of different perspectives. So, studying something like economics and then going to a political science class and then going to a history class was a really cool way to like a foundation I built. But my junior year, I realized I didn't really have any job prospects lined up. So I went through a program called Teach for America that puts you in a school for 2 years after graduating. And that's how I ended up in Arkansas. But after college, I sort of feel like I deserve another minor in Spanish or something like that. And if I could go back to university, I would have studied Spanish more intensively. I probably would have switched my English minor for a Spanish minor.
Hmm.
Yeah. Mhm.
Why?
Uh, well, we were talking about this earlier, and it's like, oh, if I had started my podcast, so many years ago, or for me, oh, if I had gone to Peru and just started doing these interviews 51 through 100 so many years ago, where would I be today? And I sort of say, or ask myself, if I started studying Spanish like in a focused, intensive way when I was 19, who knows what level I would be at now. But I guess it doesn't really matter because you're doing the podcast now. I did my interviews and now I speak Spanish. So it all works out.
I definitely understand that. I think that we also have a similar feel and perspective on languages, being that we come from countries where the reputation for the people that we are monolinguistic, and we don't want to learn the other languages. So I think that we share that same view that it is very important, because communication is very important. So I also feel the same. I wish I would have started earlier with Spanish, made it easier for myself. But now I look at the next generation and I say to my sister, for your kids, I think it's so important that they start now at this age, because at their age, my niece is 3 years old. It just goes in, everything just goes in at that age. It's so easy to learn.
Okay, here's a question. We haven't really talked about this before, but we've been talking a lot about, oh, I wish I had started doing this earlier, right? Is there anything right now that you're like, oh man, I should really start doing X, Y, or Z? Because in 4 years from now, I could say, oh, I wish I had started that when I was 25 or 30.
I think there probably are a few things. I started writing a book is definitely on my to-do list, and it has been for a long time. I originally wanted to get it written and ready for the time I was 25, but I I haven't written a page in a long time. So, and I think I don't think I'm really ready to talk about what the book is about, but I think that um I wouldn't be ready, and I don't have the experience that I need to be able to have that project ready and polished by 25. I think that will be more a 30 kind of project. So that's something that I still should be being consistent with, still writing, getting used to it again. I think when it comes to exercise as well, uh, I should be. I've really got back into it and started taking care of myself again, but it's been a very inconsistent path over the last few years. And the other things, I can always talk about languages, wanting to learn another language, but I think there are only so many things that we can fit into the week, and not to push things, not to force things so much. So just to try and use my time a bit more wisely, try and learn things, try and be more productive. Um, yeah, I would go with those answers. What about yourself?
Mm, well, I'm 30 now, so clock's ticking a little bit for some of these things. But to be like very kind to myself and very loving to myself, when I was 22, I sat down and made a list of like the 5 things I really wanted to do by the time I turned 30.
Hmm.
And I've really done most of those things. Like I was a teacher. I was a teacher for 6, 7 years. So I was able to do that like as a professional educator. I got to interview 100 for my project. To your point, I thought I would have 500 interviews by now and 50 on each major continent. So surprise, surprise. But I think that's the way I thought when I was younger, just like this very outlandish idea that I could just travel the world for 6 years. Um, but to your point, like I'm glad that things worked out the way that they did, because as soon as I finished the first 50 interviews from North Carolina, Canada, back home, I want to go straight to Peru and just do the South and Central America portion of the trip. But I really think it was God's providence, like God looking after me and keeping me in Los Angeles for 4 years at a bilingual school, because my Spanish got a lot better. My interpersonal skills got a lot better. Like I became a lot more emotionally intelligent. I learned how to talk to people more effectively.
Mm.
And so I think that is probably reflected in the quality of people I spoke to in the interviews I got in South and Central America. But I think fitness is always the one for me. Like I got the language, I got the education, I'm doing okay financially. I'm still in touch with my 3 closest friends in the world, which were my main things. But I'm not at the weightlifting goal I want to get to. So that's probably my thing too.
Do you have a specific goal?
I do. It's called the 1,000 pound club. And so between the bench press, the deadlift, and the squat, which are probably the 3 most famous compound exercises,
Hmm.
the aggregate weight between all 3 that you lift should equal 1,000 pounds, to use the American metric for it. And I'm not quite there, but that's what
Where
I'm
are
working.
you at?
Not close. I've invested a lot more time in these interviews in Spanish than I have the weight room, but I'm hoping that's something I can do when I'm here for 6 months when I'm back home.
That's the thing. Getting into a routine like that when you're traveling is incredibly hard. And I don't think I've really come across people who are able to um, be really consistent with training and traveling, because what do you do if you're traveling every 2 or 3 days? You're spending time looking for a gym, and then you want to take out 2 or 3 hours to go and train and get ready. Saying it like this makes it sound like a small excuse, but when you travel, you do realize that you don't. Sometimes the time just doesn't work out. Sometimes you find your days so full that you leave the day at 8 you leave the house at 8 a.m. and you don't get back until 10 p.m. It depends what you're doing. Sometimes you have days so full like that. So staying consistent when you're traveling with the exercise is difficult.
Yeah, I found sort of the cool thing about my project is there's lots of variability in who I can talk to. So
Mhm.
I could just go to, like when I was in Paraguay, I took an 8 hour bus trip. Was it 8 hours? I was in a bus for several hours, and I went to a place called Philadelphia because they had like this very interesting community of people. And so I'm sort of able to travel and talk to people. And I interviewed the bus driver, so it's easier to do that. But have you ever seen the show Avatar: The Last Airbender?
A little when I was a kid, yeah.
I'm not saying you should. I'm not going to shit on you, but I think you might like Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I mentioned this and I say this because we were both born in February. Uh, but the whole show is about finding balance. And so Aang's like an airbender. So he's very creative, he's very open-minded. But
Hmm.
when he has to learn how to bend earth, it's really hard for him because it's sort of the opposite of his personality, right? You have to be very firm, very structured, very stable. And so I sort of found in my life that I'm very good with air. I'm very good with moving around. I'm very good with talking to different people, learning languages, not the hardest thing. But sometimes having a set routine and schedule is a little bit hard for me. So that's something I'm trying to develop when I'm back home.
I never put two and two together, but yeah, you're right. I never thought that it could be a thing to do with Aquarius horoscopes and stuff, but maybe you're right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're like an incredibly open-minded person, right?
I like to think so.
And you're very open to new, interesting experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, should I start a podcast where I talk to my friends from China and Sudan and Los Angeles and Colombia, or should I do the exact same thing? Um, yeah. But it seems like you've been pretty consistent with your uploads for the podcast, like every Friday. Like,
Yes, to a T. I mean, after the fourth episode, that the next week, I don't know. At that point, I still felt very kind of shy to be asking people, because I felt like I was, it's hard to describe, but I felt like I was really asking something of someone, and I wasn't giving enough credit to what it's not just me. Like, I'm giving someone else an opportunity to share their story, and everyone knows that then no one's obliged to do this. This is an invitation. And rather than thinking like, I don't speak to this person normally, like we haven't spoken to each other in a long time, and now I'm asking 2 hours of their time just for my project, I felt like it was being selfish. But now I've started to look at it more like, this is a chance to catch up with people that I wouldn't necessarily catch up with otherwise. So it's actually really nice being able to catch up with people that I haven't spoken to in a long time.
it's really hard in the beginning too. I mean, like when you talk to Santiago for, this is my first interview. That's hard too, because you almost like you don't have social proof. Like now you have an Instagram page and you have like this intro and outro and you've talked to like 20 people. So I literally just watched the first 4 interviews to get the vibe for what we were doing. But I'm sure that first one was probably really hard just to, no Facebook page, no Instagram page, no YouTube, just I'm gonna ask this guy, right?
Yeah, just start from that's the thing. I didn't have a base to start from. I didn't have a structure. It was a lot of improvisation. And now I have, I mean, it is still a lot of improvisation because I want it to be flexible. But yeah, it's definitely a lot easier now, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, out of curiosity, like I'm sure you've learned a lot about like the world and other cultures through this, but have you learned anything about yourself really? Like, have you grown, or has there been like aspects of yourself that have become more apparent to you as a consequence of starting this project?
It's a good question. I think I don't think that I've given it enough thought. I think it definitely, in some ways, sometimes it reminds me to stay humble. It reminds me that I do have so much more to learn. But it also validates my experience, I think, as well. I have one friend recently who said to me about it, like he showed me we were talking about traveling, and he's saying, I have these photos, but like, what's it for? Like, no one really cares. And I say, well, the thing is, we travel for ourselves. We don't travel. Some people travel to show the world, but for me, I travel for myself because I want to know. I want to explore, and I want to give other people the opportunity to share their experiences too. So, and sometimes it's nice, like, okay, now I have some people who listen to me on a regular basis, and it's nice that they can hear some of my experiences and other people's experiences. What about you? What have you learned about yourself with these 100 interviews?
Well, I think similarly to you, um, there's a sense in which I've been so focused just on the heart of the project itself that sometimes it's hard to reflect about what I've learned or who I've become as a consequence.
Hmm.
Because you're so focused on actually getting the interviews and talking to the people and oh my gosh, I'm in this country for 2 weeks and I have to find four people who I can authentically connect to.
Hmm.
I think number one, it's made me a more faithful person, to be honest. Like through my first 50 interviews, I sort of by name called myself a Christian, but I didn't really pray that much. I didn't really get too much into the Bible.
Hmm.
But when I was in that Buddhist temple or the Buddhist meditating community, I came a lot closer to my Christian faith. And so, in some ways, going around the world saying, oh, I'm doing projects for Universal Brotherhood and I'm a Christian person holds me to a really high standard to myself. And so, when I get into arguments with people, which has happened, or when I am angry at people, which has happened, it makes me think, oh man, I'm not a good enough representative for this thing. Like, how can I be a representative for something like Universal Brotherhood? But I would say that it's made me a lot more socially confident. Going
Hmm.
to a country saying I'm here for 3 weeks and I have to talk to five people and not just talk to five strangers, but get to know the life stories of five people has required me to do things I would never do. Like in Bolivia, a woman invited me to a wedding. And usually I'd say, oh, no, 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 no. But I was like, all right, sounds good. Let's go. So I end up in this Bolivian wedding holding a little child. Um, or when I was going through Colorado, I had to spend the night in a Greyhound station because my bus was extended. And so I just saw a lot of drug use in this Greyhound station, lots of bad things. But I was able to make friends with Luke, and we spent the night just talking. And so it's put me in a position where I've had to be more socially brave and where I've had to like really look out for myself. Um,
Hmm.
but like you mentioned, like talking to so many people keeps me humble and it makes me want to go to Spain and Europe and India and all these places and learn even more. So it inspires me to keep knowing people.
Have you been to Europe before?
Fleetingly, I went to Europe for 2 weeks. I
Yeah.
was in London for a week, Edinburgh for a few days, and Amsterdam for a few days with my good friends. So I wasn't really in interview mode; it was more like relaxation, vacation mode.
Sorry,
But my
that
plan was
this
Spain.
year. That was when you were you did an officiation of a wedding, no? You officiated a wedding?
Yes, sir. So I did Europe for 2 weeks, I think. Came back and I was the officiant in my friend Jerry's wedding. And then I headed back to Colombia, and that's where we met when I was oh no, we met in Colombia
Yeah.
the first time.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
just I just left by the time that you'd go back. A few
Okay.
days apart, I think it was, yeah.
Okay. How long were you there for in total?
Well, 4 months. So I left Chinchina on the 13th or 14th of May, and I think you arrived back again on the 17th, something like that.
Hmm. Okay. No, I don't mean to inflate your ego, but it's very true. People did speak very highly of you when you left. Lots of people were like, "Oh, Benito, like I wish he would come back. He was so cool. He spoke Spanish." Um, so timing works out for a reason, but they did really value you for the time you were there.
It's nice to know.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It is a big world. It is a really big world, and we're in a constant process of discovery when it comes to that. The I am sure you had a similar experience. Obviously, you come from a very big country as well. I come from a lot smaller of a country. Um, and then going to Australia, I had the first realization about, wow, this country's so big. And then I felt it again, like, then I went back to Europe and everything's so close. And then I go to South America and you realize how big this continent is. This continent is so big. You can be the longest bus ride I had. I was on the bus for 31 hours between Bariloche and Calafate. El Calafate in Argentina, in La Patagonia, and just thinking it's crazy because you go through so much nothing as well. You're for I don't know 80% of the trip you see nothing. So to see that and to see how big the world is, it's just really really crazy. So many places to see.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like a yin yang thing too, where um, you're just in a place like rural Colombia and you walk into a random restaurant, which you could very easily pass. But then you go into the restaurant and you meet a woman who's Danny, who's interview 77 for me. And just her life is so complicated and she has all these relationships and personal victories and things that haven't worked out for her and responsibilities that she has. Or you walk by the school that we teach at and you could very easily miss it if you were just walking down the street. But you realize that people like the teachers there are giving their whole lives to this and they're doing so many great things for the kids. And there's such a struggle to bring bilingual education to this area that it's almost overwhelming being in a place like Argentina, Buenos Aires, or Santiago, or La Paz, because you see thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And they all have these really interesting stories. And this might happen for you when you start traveling again in Europe or Southeast Asia, or if you do El Camino de Santiago. I walk around the world now, and every person I meet, it's like, this person could be an interview, right? Or this person could be an interview. So it's really opened me up to human experience too. Has that been the same with you? Like, do you have a list of people you really still want to talk to, or are they mostly people from your previous travels?
When you say a list of people that I want to talk to, you mean significant figures in the world or in my life, or?
Oh, I guess. Well, so I'm interview number 20.
Yes.
So the 19 people before me, I imagine, like with Nigel and Santiago and Carlos, you probably knew consciously, like, oh, this would be a cool, interesting person to talk to.
Yeah. It has been. The thing is, when I first announced the project on my Facebook and stuff, I left it as a very open invitation. I told everyone, like, if anyone's interested. There were a couple people who have come forward. Nothing was organized as a result of that. So I feel like it is very much on me to be asking people. But usually when I ask, people are very warm to the idea of it. It's just a matter of time, with them living in different time zones, that we have to organize it. So there's specific people in my life. There are a few people who I really would like to make an episode with, and it's in the process. But there are so many interesting people that I've met in my life, at different points in my life, that I would love to make an episode with. So I don't really have a specific list. I thought about keeping track of it a bit more, but no, I'm more just open to the opportunities that come. And what about you? Are there any people in your life that you would like to interview as part of your project?
Well, the intention is to get 50 interviews on each continent. And so in North America, Canada, the US, and Mexico, I had 50 interviews. That was the first leg of the journey, first chapter. And then the second chapter was South and Central America together, getting 50 interviews. And I got that, with this being the last interview of that chapter. So my intention is to go to Spain next year and to do 50 interviews in Europe. The name of the project is Love John Cooper. And the reason why is my grandpa, John Cooper, before he died, he gave me his watch as sort of a way to carry on his legacy. And so I've been trying to interview people in my family as well to talk about what his legacy has been. He was a doctor. He was a big leader in his community. So I definitely want to interview my cousins, like Christina, Ariel, Scott, Bryce, Greg, Melanie, Brett, to get their perspective on, who was grandpa as a person, What do you remember about him? And then I have a list of like celebrities I'd love to talk to. Like there's a guy, Dirk Nowitzki, the basketball player. I would just, he's German, so it could count as a European interview. Throw it in.
Do I count as European interview?
Yeah, you'll be the bridge. You'll be the bridge between South America and stuff because you speak Spanish. You've been to Buenos Aires, and you're from Europe, so there you go.
I'm currently living in North America.
Perfect. It's a perfect bridge. You've been to South America. You live in North America. You're from Europe. Very very international of you. I'll throw it in. Yeah, but yeah, that's pretty much it. So my eyes are set on Europe for the next leg, for the next chapter.
Mm-hmm. And when you say you're planning on going to Spain next year, would that be a teaching position? Is that the idea?
So you said something in one of your podcasts. I want to say it was your interview with Carlos, but I don't remember. But you said something like it's not so much the destination, it's the journey. And for my first 50 interviews, I didn't know that I was going to take a Greyhound bus from North Carolina to California. It's just I had 3 months before my next job started, so it seemed like a cool thing to do. Same thing with South and Central America. I didn't know I was going to take a bus or a series of buses down from Guatemala down to Costa Rica. I didn't know I was going to interview, 4 homeless guys in El Salvador. I didn't know I was going to interview a restaurant owner in El Salvador. I didn't know anything about Casa Copan, which is the people I talked to in Honduras. It's like sometimes it's really hard to say or to predict where I'll go specifically or who I'll talk to. It's happened so many times on this journey. I can't even tell you where, I'll go to a Catholic church to interview the priest, or I'll go to a human rights museum, but then they cancel the interviews, or I just can't talk to that person, but then there's somebody else on the street. Or as a consequence of walking to this museum, I meet somebody who then becomes my friend for a week and becomes an interview. So my dream life in 6 months would be I wake up in a cool flat, a cool apartment in Madrid. Maybe I have a really beautiful girlfriend. She comes with me to all these countries and we do interviews with my new sound equipment and my video stuff. But my plan for next year, if it's by Spencer time, would be to have like a cool job in Madrid, like as a teacher, and then on long weekends going to different communities in Europe to do interviews. That would be the ideal, but who knows what will happen.
Yeah. One thing that I picked up and I wanted to ask, why would they cancel the interviews? How many times has it happened to you?
Well, so I have 100 interviews, and the number of times like people I've asked and they've said no has been really high.
Really?
Yeah. I think has that not been your experience?
No.
Well, so with the Catholic priest specifically, he did an interview with me. But then when I came back with recording equipment, it was like, oh, no. And I don't know if that's just because he's a leader in the community or why that was. But that I wasn't able to interview him with a recording, for example. So maybe like it's not always that interviews get canceled necessarily. It's just I have the intention to talk to somebody here. At the Human Rights Museum, I had the intention of talking to the director, not a set date. So it wasn't anything like set in stone. It's just something I wished would happen almost. So sometimes it's a cancellation, but more often than not, it's just, oh, we're not interested. But it's a consequence of going to the place to ask that I run into somebody else.
Yeah. Do you believe in free will, or do you have a deterministic view on life?
Interesting question. I think it comes down to our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Something I found a lot on this project is I'll go in with my own conception of what I think should happen. I should interview this person, and this person. And then I end up interviewing 3 totally different people. So the main idea is the same, but the details are slightly different. To answer your question directly, free will versus determinism, I don't think I'm qualified enough to answer that question. I just know that when I pray in the morning and I do my best to go out and get an interview, I usually do. And there's no way I could have predicted the 100 people I've talked to. Like, I couldn't have predicted that you would have made a podcast and that you would have reached out to me. And what a fitting way to do interview 100, but it worked out. So I guess, what's your view on that?
I believe everything happened the way it was supposed to. I really and truly, no, I don't believe that we have free will, but I believe that we should live our lives as if we do. We should think that we do. You know, even if it's not true, even if maybe I'm completely wrong, maybe we have a choice over our actions. But I feel like we should wake up with the attitude that we do, regardless or not of whether we do.
Yeah, I feel like if that's the perspective, it almost requires like a really deep empathy for other people. Something that I've experienced in my interviews and on the journey is there's times I've been very, very, very angry with people because I felt they didn't tell me the truth, or I felt like they were taking advantage of me for whatever reason. And if we do have a deterministic view, like people are going to act the way that they're going to act, at least consciously, I would think, oh, this person doesn't know any better, right? They're only talking to me this way, or they're only treating me this way, or they're only sharing this narrative about me because it's the height of their capacity. It's what they know best to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is true, and we can't go around. That's the thing. We have our own convictions about what we believe to be true about life, but at the end of the day, other people don't share those, and we can't hold that against them. You know, I mean, you could, I guess, and maybe some things is more justified than others. Someone who does go and someone who goes and kills your mother, for example. I understand that it's a very extreme example. I understand that it would be very difficult to not hold that against that person, but at the same time, I think when we do hold on to those feelings because of our own convictions, it can make our lives more difficult than it should be or has to be.
You know, to be honest with you, that's something I think about in terms of like a bias with my project is, you know, if you look at a social identity wheel, so like age, first language, country of origin, socioeconomic status, sexuality, gender, you know, all those things. I think I have a really diverse group of people. Like just looking at it visually or seeing the age ranges from 18 to 96, right? So many different skin tones, so many first languages, all of that. But the bias is most everyone I talk to is very open-minded. Oh, universal brotherhood. Yeah, man. Like I'll talk to you, sure. And so there's a part of me that thinks it'd be better to talk to more close-minded people, right? And so I've tried to do that more as the project goes on. Is, you know, what about a group that's like very anti-immigrant? Or what about someone who says, oh, this is a stupid project you're doing? You know, you're some kid from North America running around asking about universal brotherhood, like that's what you're doing. So like that voice of skepticism or that voice of dismissal. But you know, I would say that in South America, there's two people I've really had to forgive, who I thought didn't treat me well or didn't treat certain communities well. And I'm not usually a resentful person, but it led to lots of bitterness and lots of anger for me personally towards this other person. And I eventually have forgiven those people in action, like by actually sending them letters and actually talking to them or communicating after the fact. But it really makes me think, you know, if it's so hard for me to forgive this person, and like you said, no one's mom died, no one actually got hurt. Lots of people are inconvenienced, but how on earth could someone from, you know, like Palestine, Israel, or any other world conflicts, like how do you bridge that gap? Like, what do you do to reconcile that? You know, how could you get two people into the same room to talk about this happened to this side, this happened to this side? It's been happening for hundreds of years. And so that's a really complex thing that I think about a lot now. Is it's easy to say, oh, let's all live together in love and it's fantastic. But actually reconciling that or actually getting people together is a very, very difficult thing to do.
There are some people that we should just not be around. I'm talking that on an individual basis. That doesn't mean to say that there are people that the whole of society should avoid. I don't think that's true, but I think that everyone has some people that even the people that we might see, they are living on the brink of society, I guess you could say, in terms of outcast people. There are still people who they can be around, who they can connect with. How did you manage to forgive those people?
Well, to be honest, it brought me to a pretty low point because it sort of happened bang bang. And there's like this expression that if an enemy hurts me, whatever, like it's an enemy, it's coming. They dislike you, right? But if it happens from a friend or a mentor, a friend or a mentor is really the only person who has the capacity to betray you. And betrayal there's a reason in Dante's Inferno it's like the lowest circle of hell, right? Is there something really deep and really powerful and really painful about that experience? Luckily, my brother was with me for a month in South America. He came down to Peru with me. And so we got to travel around, go to Machu Picchu, the Sacred Valley, get some interviews down there. But what it really required was looking at myself. So I made a big list of all the bad things that I had done in my life. And it came out to a list of 50 people from ages like 13 to 30. Like, I didn't treat this person well. I was dismissive and rude towards this person. I insulted this person. This person I didn't treat very well. So I had this big list of like 50 people. And I did my best to go through and reconcile with as many people as I could in a way that wouldn't cause more harm, in a way that was honest and open. There's some people I didn't reach out to because I thought there wasn't really a point or it would be more destructive than helpful. But forgive us our trespasses as we've forgiven those who have trespassed against us. And I said, look, I'm judging these two people really hard. If somebody was judging me that harshly and had that much anger, I wouldn't want that for them. And not to excuse myself, but I want them to move on, to be happy and to not be sort of stuck in the past. So it required a lot of prayer. And I don't think I could have done it by myself, by my own cognition, by my own thought, because I was so angry and so convinced that I was right. But looking at myself and saying, well, Spence, you've done lots of bad things and you don't want to be persecuted for that. Maybe forgive the other people too. And it's like the Buddha says, being resentful or being angry towards someone is like drinking poison, expecting the other person to die. So I resolved why I was angry, the boundaries that I thought were violated, or the boundaries that were violated personally. But then just saying, I could either be angry and resentful about the situation in my room, or I could go to Machu Picchu with my brother. I could be angry and bitter about this, or I could go to Valparaíso, Santiago de Chile, or in Chile, and have a great time.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had to, I mean this in the best way, but you're an active listener and strike me as a very emotionally intelligent person. And usually that comes as a consequence of having some life experiences. Are there people like you've had to forgive in your life?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I think it took a long time to realize that. I was having this conversation with someone the other day, that when the first time I left the UK, I really put in the effort with a lot of my friends to stay in contact, and I didn't feel like it was mutually it was mutual. I felt like I was putting in all the effort, and I did leave me very angry for a while because I felt like the people that I had in my life, the constants that I'd had in my life for the 7 or 8 years that I'd known most of these people, had disappeared. But then I had to reflect, well, we're not in the same place. We're doing different things with our lives. I can't expect that from anyone because no one can expect that from me at the end of the day. And it did take me a while to understand that a lot of relationships are situational. You know, you're friends with people because you're there in the same place. And maybe you get along, maybe that can last a long time. But maybe as soon as you go, that disappears. You're just in different places, in different situations. So I think as soon as I learned that lesson, it helped. But that was just the start. And I feel like every year I learn more and more, and I become more understanding of that concept. And even this last year, I felt like I've learned it 100 times over. Um, but yeah, it doesn't help anyone being angry with them. It doesn't help yourself. It doesn't help them. People have to learn from their mistakes. You hope that they do the right thing the next time around. But at the end of the day, exactly as you described before, these things are so minor in the grand scheme of things. You know, you can get as angry as you want at a person, but that's not going to change the situation. That doesn't change the fact that you've also done that I've also done wrong. Um, so I think there are very few situations where people. I don't think there is a situation where someone can't be forgiven. I mean, I wasn't expecting that those words would come out exactly, but yeah, I think that's true.
Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, I can't put myself in those shoes exactly because I don't know. I haven't had. Well, for example, I got robbed in Barcelona. They took my phone, my passport, my wallet, and I was left on the ground um, with nothing. But I was 19, and I in some ways I got myself into that situation. You know, I was drunk, I was alone, so I was vulnerable. Um, but when I left that situation, I had to say, well, I'm still alive, you know, and that is the most important thing. What's a phone at the end of the day? What's a passport at the end of the day? It was a few days of, well, a few weeks of stress and having to resolve that. But I can't be angry at these people that I don't know. It wasn't right what they did, but at the same time, if I hold that over me, how am I going to be able to live my life traveling if I'm always going to be looking over my shoulder?
No, the same thing happened to me in Santi. Well, not to the extent happened to you, and I'm sorry that happened to you. Like, to be clear, that's not okay what the other people did,
Mhm.
right? It's sort of a really messed up thing to do, especially to a 19-year-old kid who's obviously, foreigner in the country. But when I was in Santiago, someone stole my phone, and my immediate thought was like, oh, like, generational curses on this person's house, like, just like the worst possible things you could think about the person.
Yeah.
But then pretty much right away, like my higher self kicked in, and I sat down at a coffee shop and just, I had a coffee and okay, it's gonna be okay. It's just a cell phone. The person's obviously struggling. Perhaps they're an immigrant themselves. They're probably not in the best situation if they have to steal somebody else's phone, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I can get a new one whenever. I'm from the United States. I'm from LA. Like, it's not that hard to build myself back up after, like, a week of work, to be honest. Um, but when I sat down at the coffee shop and I just prayed and I said, like, dear Lord, like, it's gonna sound strange, but please bless that person so they no longer have to be in a position where they're doing that. And when I was sitting down, a girl sat across from me. She's literally a Chilean model, and she became my first interview in Chile. Um, Now I didn't have a phone, so I just took her picture at the bus stop a few times. But she said she would send me an answer. And so, in a cosmic sense, I feel that if we can let go of the small things, we can have a better perspective of the big things. So, well, maybe work isn't working out, but I live in the richest state in the richest country in the world, and probably the richest county in Orange County, right? To be honest, I've been able to travel all through South and Central America, by the time I was 30. And you've probably experienced this traveling around, people who've never left their home state, people who've never left their home community, people who are monolingual. So to have had the opportunity to do all those cool things, um, big thumbs up.
Hmm. At
What
the end
about,
of the day, sorry,
oh, no, go for it.
I was just gonna say these things are inevitable, you know, and it's better when no one gets hurt in a situation. Sometimes it happens, but yeah, you have to take it. You have to look at the perspective of the situation. Mm.
Mhm. Has anything like that happened to you since, like the like I know being robbed and for all your stuff in 19 is pretty rough. Has that been like your hardest international travel story, or has there been other stuff? I don't know if
Yeah,
that's too deep a question. Like I sounds pretty
no,
rough.
it's fine. It's fine. No, I think people have tried, but I'm a bit more conscious of it. And the the only other time like it really happened was in Brazil. I was with my friend, and we were in Lapa, the party district of Rio, at 5 in the morning. He had his phone in front of him. We were waiting for the Uber, and
Mm.
two guys come up with a box cutter. So they were just we were. I was looking at my friend, and then we were just looking at each other for 30 seconds. My friend speaks Portuguese.
Mhm.
He didn't say anything. He was like dumbfounded in the moment. And I took a couple of cigarettes from a pack of cigarettes and I gave them and they left, you know. So they just wanted something quick and easy. They didn't those people mostly don't want to hurt anyone. They're just desperate and they have their problems and they want something quick and easy. Other than that, I think it's more just emotional things, problems with friends, heartbreaks, and whatnot.
Yeah, well, I know you've been in Montreal. You said for 7 months you've been in Montreal.
Very close to, yeah.
You know, something I've become a lot more aware of in myself is sort of like the coping mechanisms I would use on the road for familiarity.
Hmm.
Because as cool as it is to have friends in Bolivia and Costa Rica and to go have these experiences, at the end of the day, I come back to the hostel or I come back to the room and it's just Spencer,
Hmm.
right? And so I actually think I became a lot closer with lots of my deepest friends like Adam and Ray and Evan, my mom and dad, because it's like I literally have no one else. Like, who else could understand this journey or who else could contextualize this rather than those people that are closest to me? Um, so I think it made me a lot in going on this trip made me much more deeply appreciative of the good friends that I have, and knowing
Hmm.
that it's kind of rare in life to have people like that who have your back so in such a committed way.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. How do you feel right now being back in the States?
Well, I'm in my childhood bedroom right now. And you know, on this wall you can see my friend gave me this in college.
Yeah.
My brother made this little piece of art for me. Um, oh, some of my students, when I was a high school teacher, gave me this little pig because we read the book Animal Farm. So I was like, oh, Comrade Napoleon, oink oink oink, you know. Uh, so it's surreal because like a week ago, I was in the Dominican Republic asking myself, how am I going to get two more interviews before I leave back home? Because my number was so hard, 49, get these 49 interviews. And I just, you know, I was sort of a little bit stressed. I was a little bit anxious being there. And, you know, the Dominican Republic, it's not the most developed country in the entire world.
Hmm.
And so just the conversations I was having in Spanish and the frustrations I had with a few people there, or the beautiful moments I had with a few people there, it just sort of disappears. And now I'm back in Los Angeles. I'm back in Orange County. And I think the really shocking thing to me is it was always hard to leave the countries in my last day or my last week. Like it was incredibly hard for me to leave Colombia. It was really hard for me to leave Argentina. It was hard for me to leave Guatemala. And something I'm very conscious of now is like all of those communities are still happening. I'm just not there,
Hmm.
So it's like Valeria is still living her life. Claudia is still living her life. TK is still living his life. Santiago is living his life. All these people, the communities are still existing. The cities are still going on. I'm just not there. And so I think I have time to reflect now, though, now that I'm back home. How do you feel about going back to Europe? I mean, it's been a while since you've been back, huh?
Yeah, well, it's been nearly 2 years now. I mean, it would be nice to see my family and friends, but I know that that would be very short-lived. Not being around them, but the feeling of who I am there. I'm not me there. I'm not myself. I'm no longer that person. Um, and I think it's best that it stays that way. That I'm there as a visitor. Um, because last time it was difficult. Being there for 5 months, I was going crazy. I was really going crazy. Again, I obviously had a lot of things to reflect on as well. But yeah, at some point, it's not my home anymore. And Hempstead is no longer the place for me.
Interesting. I have to ask, like, what is there something you consider home for you? Like, is it in a project like this? Is it just where you are? Is it an immediate band or group of friends? Or do you consider yourself just so nomadic that you don't really have a home?
It's a very good question. I think someone posed this to me recently. Um, yeah, I think it's my home is where my backpack is, kind of deal. Um, and of course, I'm searching for that place that one day I will be able to call home. For now, until now, I think I found some places that come close, but I don't think I found that place.
That's a really honest answer. I think that's a really good answer.
It's it's a little sad as well, I think. The fact that I feel deserted by my own country, not by I don't say that in the way of my friends and family, but I mean more the politics of my own country, that I can no longer see the place that I was born as a viable option to live. I think that is sad. But I have felt that way for a long time. So I consider myself a European before anything. Sadly, I'm not able to live in the rest of my continent after Brexit. So, so yeah, I would like to. That is a goal. That is a goal. At some point, I will get my European citizenship back, and I will believe I will spend a large portion of my life living there. Um, so yeah, if I had to say anywhere, a general area, I would say Europe is my home, but the UK is not.
Hmm.
Do you feel at home?
I'm very, I don't know what adjective you want to use. Blessed, lucky, privileged, fortunate, whatever expression you want to use.
Mhm.
But like I have the most amazing home base. And that's something I feel not every traveler has, or
Mhm.
not every backpacker has, or not every, because there's a reason people go on the road, right? And when I was 18, I felt like I had to leave. I just felt like I didn't really have the relationships or the connections socially that would keep me in a place. Even though I was always conscious that I had the most amazing family, like my mom, my dad, my brother. My brother is my best friend. I talk to my mom and my dad all the time about anything. So I'm in a very unique position where I I was alienated enough from my community to actually go and experience the world, but I was loved enough by my family to come back home. And now that I'm 30, lots of the things I just see as sort of petty and silly. And I've grown a lot on the journey too, so I feel very home here in Huntington Beach. And so when I go on the road, when I go to Spain, it's less like I have to do it. It's less that I feel like I'm being pushed out and I have to go to
Mhm.
to find myself. It's more like I found myself. I'm Spencer. This is who I am. These are my identities. This is how I talk to other people. These are my glaring and apparent insecurities and things I'm not very good at that everyone else can see. But that's okay. And I want to go to Spain because I want to experience it. I want to see Europe. Perzanowski, Spencer John Perzan. It's an extraordinarily European name, but outside of speaking English and looking like this, there's nothing really European about me.
Is it Polish name?
Yeah. So ski is de or from. So there's a little community called Perzanał, which apparently I'm from. I've recently learned that the Polish don't enjoy the highest reputation in Europe, which was news to me. But I really want to go to Perzanał actually and get an interview or two in Polish. I think it could be really fun.
Is that generations ago? It's not recent immigration.
Yeah, so it would be my dad's grandparents.
Okay, your great grandparents.
Yeah, great. That's the word. Yeah, great grandparents. There you go. Whoops.
Yeah, I don't think that. I think the Polish reputation has been superseded now. I don't think that they look down upon in Europe anymore.
I'll say it like this. So, when I was in Nicaragua, I was on a bus to go to just a community, and I met someone from Poland. And he's like, "What's your last name?" I said, "Perzanowski." He's like, "What?" I said, "Perzanowski." He's like, "That's not your last name. It's Perzanowski." And I realized I'd never actually heard my last name pronounced correctly, like in the native tongue, you know. So that doesn't play into Polish stereotype necessarily, but I do have a lot to learn about my European, what ancestry, I guess would be the word. And I consider myself fairly ignorant. Like I met a guy from Denmark, and he was talking about this village he was from, and how there's more immigrants there from insert country here because of the humanitarian work from the European Union. And I was like, yeah, that's probably crazy for these immigrants to come into a homogenous community. He's like, what are you talking about? We've had people from Morocco here for like generations. And I just felt so ignorant because I know so little about Europe that I just assumed is a totally white little farming village, when in reality is like a very pluralistic, diverse place before the immigrants had arrived. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about Europe.
Yes, I mean, Europe is such a diverse continent, and I know that the people from your country get a bad rap for that specifically, about not having any kind of awareness. But I think you do have to take into consideration, you also do come from a very large country, a very big country, and we can't be expected to know the ins and outs and the little crevices of the United States. So I think that maybe you guys get a little too much shit for not knowing, when we're not experts either. We're not experts on the United States.
In the United States, there's no real need. Well, okay, let's take it back. See, I want to make sure what I'm saying is correct. The perception of lots of Americans is legitimately like we're number one. Europe, that's like a place we go on vacation. South America, why would you go there? Everyone wants to come here. So there is this sense
in South America.
Well, one of somebody in my life made the comment when I was moving to Colombia. She said, "Spence, why would you move to Colombia? Most people want to move here." And I think that's a very American percent. And in a sense, so many people do want to come to the United States. And even when I was in places like Colombia and Buenos Aires, so much of the media consumed is American. Like I saw the Avengers in every country I went to. Most of the movies were, from the United States in the movie theaters, just subbed in Spanish or dubbed in Spanish. So much of the music my friends would listen to, and these are Spanish speakers, like pretty much monolingual Spanish speakers, are listening to like artists from the United States. And in a sense, if I'm going to Colombia, most people don't go to Medellin, Colombia, thinking about the history. Oh, how did Bolivar influence this place? I wonder to what extent did Spanish imperialism or colonialism influence? I'm going to Medellin for a fun week. And that's sort of the unfortunate thing, and something that I think probably separated me on my travels down there, is I was legitimately interested in the history and the culture and, oh, what's this? And lots of people said, oh, it's really refreshing that you want to know about the country as opposed to just coming to do X, Y, or Z. And so the whole perception of Americans is consuming South and Central America, not always for the best things. I mean, you want to go to Venezuela, talk about the history of the United States and Venezuela. I can't even go there because of the history. So it's a pretty deep thing.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you, obviously there's been something very recent that happened in the United States. You had your election there. How do you think that things are going to turn out with the Donald Trump back in power?
To be honest with you, many people's lives won't change, right? Whether it's Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Trump. Sure, Trump might post something or make this or that comment, but does that really greatly influence my day-to-day life in Orange County? Not really. I did work in a very Latino community. Well, I've worked in two very Latino communities. And if you go onto the Donald Trump, platform when he was running for president, he had like a 20-point campaign promise. And I believe one of the first 5 points is like deport as many illegal people as possible. And so I can only imagine the fear of being somebody who is a first generation immigrant or a second generation immigrant and knowing that the person that's currently in power in your country has literally promised and dedicated resources to, building the wall. That was the whole expression in the first election, right? Or sending people back to South and Central America. So I come from a very privileged place where it doesn't really, in my personal life, impact me daily. But I know for other people, people that are close to me, it is a scary thing.
Mhm.
I think also internationally, having Trump as president has been really interesting. I mean, you hear about people like Richard Nixon, who was the first president to go to China, and about like the goodwill missions that they would run and the diplomacy that was evident there. But now Trump is calling Trudeau the governor of Canada, and he's trying to make Canada a state. So it doesn't really help the two countries in that way. So I think it's unfortunate he was elected. I think it's unfortunate that Joe Biden stepped down after such a while because Kamala Harris didn't really have a lot of time to platform or to talk and to get her point across. But what do you think about it, out of curiosity? I mean, from the European or perspective.
I mean, evidently, I'm not a fan. I'm not pro capitalism, and I think he very well represents the state of the United States at the moment. What the people want is a reflection. He is a reflection of the people at the end of the day, and to me, that screams a lot of people are very misinformed about the reality. Because lots of people think that he's going to be great for them, and exactly like you say, he's not going to affect most people, but the most vulnerable people of society, yes, it is going to have an impact. He doesn't like those vulnerable people of society. Fundamentally, he will do everything he can to take the small things that they have away from them, and I think that is really sad. So I mean, we managed to get out of the fascist state that we had in the UK. Not that we had a big improvement this year, but it was better. And you guys have gone the opposite way. So I think what is really scary is this might be misinformation, but I do believe they want to work on a denaturalization program as well. That is in the talk. They want to strip away citizenship of people who they claim to have achieved it unlawfully or something like that. And I don't think fundamentally a country should be able to take its citizenship away from an individual. I think once that person has the agreement with the country that they are a citizen, there shouldn't be anything that can take that away fundamentally.
Have you seen the movie Selena?
No.
Do you know who Selena is?
No.
So there's a scene from this movie where there's a group of Mexican immigrants, and I think they're second generation, so they're documented in the United States. And the father says, being a Mexican American is a really hard thing to do because you have to be more American than the Americans to gain social access, but you also have to be more Mexican than the Mexicans. And working in a bilingual school for 4 years was so interesting because we had kids with last names like Cruz, Lopez, who couldn't speak a word of Spanish because they learned, or their parents knew, if my child can speak the power language of the United States, which is English, they'll perhaps have more social access. And then on the other hand, we had recent arrival kids who really only spoke Spanish and maybe had 100 words of English. And so you see this huge spectrum of what it means to be a Latino in the United States. Because I just said Mexican, but Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, all these people exist in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think that, to me, the thing that's most difficult about having Trump as president is somebody who outwardly uses the rhetoric of like send them back, or like you were talking about earlier, kids in cages on the border. And to what extent is that sensationalized?
Eating cats in
Yeah,
the Haitian immigrants were eating cats.
right. And it's just unfortunate because the United States, we're such a hugely educated group of people. I mean, so many people have college degrees. We literally have PhD experts in international relations and economics and trade policy. And like you said, the deepest reflection of our will is this person who's an entertainer, fundamentally. Like that's the best we could do. There's a Spanish expression, un amigo es el espejo donde tú eres él. A friend is the mirror where you were him. And the fact that, this person even had the position to win the presidency in the first place, go through all these trials, win it again, it's just like, how, but I totally understand why. I lived in the south of the United States for 3 years, and where I was a teacher voted something like 80% Trump, something like this, in the election. So when you talk to normal people, you understand why they would do that. And it's not just the immigration policy. It's also, put America first, bring our jobs back. Lots of these are like poor or disenfranchised people who, a generation or two generations ago, their parents had factory work. And so they're able to have a very middle class, nice lifestyle, but also those jobs have disappeared. So it's not just everybody buying into the rhetoric, but the fact that the rhetoric is part of the platform is a really dangerous thing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reality of the right wing, and I mean, even the left wing in the United States is very far from the left. It's still center right. So I don't know. I also don't want to get too political, but it is sad to see the state of the world, and it's like I've been seeing this this ongoing thing about the informed minority will always beat the uninformed majority. And now with how easy it is to spread all this misinformation, it's just they have so much power. They really have so much power, and it's doing a lot of damage to the world, unfortunately. People are scared of this. It's crazy how scared of people are of the word socialism when they don't understand what it means. They don't understand that it means people not having to pay for healthcare or education, or on the contrary, that they do understand and they think that that's a bad thing. People having to pay for their health. No, sorry, that they don't, that they get their healthcare for free. They think that that's a bad thing, or that they get their education for free. That's a bad thing. Or having good public transportation, they think that's a bad thing, and maybe this is coming from a Eurocentric mind being born there, but to me those things are fundamental. Everyone has to learn things. Everyone will need healthcare at some point in their lives. Everyone should be able to get around as they need to, and no one should have to pay for those things. No one should have to worry about where they're going to sleep or what they're going to eat.
When I was in college, are you familiar with Bernie Sanders?
I am familiar with Bernie Sanders, yeah.
he was the first and, frankly, the only politician in the United States, modern day, who really inspired me. Like, I worked for his campaign. I would go around and talk to people about Bernie Sanders. I'd wear the little button, I worked for his campaign in Flagstaff as a volunteer. I wasn't paid, but just the things he was saying, they just seem so common sense. Like, because in the United States, people 30, 40, 50, $60,000 of student debt, which is fantastically a huge number. You have people who need medical procedures. And when I was a teacher, healthcare is provided as a part of the program. But now that I don't have that kind of employment, it's like, wow, health insurance, it costs this much. And one accident could really bankrupt you as a person, on top of that student debt. And so when I listened to Bernie Sanders, I'm like, whoa, this would be so amazing for the country. And those are things I hadn't really heard about. Like sure, we had Obamacare. And when Obama came in, he had some interesting policy measures. But most people weren't talking about the cool Obama politics. They're like, oh, hope, change. And, in the United States, it's just some things are not a part of the common conversation. Like one of the things Joe Biden said is I'll give X amount of dollars of student relief to university students, which is something that didn't happen in the first place. But that's not a truly progressive agenda. And someone like Bernie Sanders really talking about minimum wage, healthcare, like you were talking about, access to free education, was such an inspiring idea. But then he didn't even get the nomination from his own party because he was deemed to be too liberal. He was deemed to be too far on the left, and people thought he would alienate, the voters. So we nominated Clinton instead, and she's who lost to Trump the first time.
Mm-hmm. She won the popular vote. She had more votes than Trump, and still that's another issue in itself. But we had the same. We had the same with Jeremy Corbyn. I don't know if you're familiar with Jeremy Corbyn, but he was our Bernie Sanders. He wanted to do progressive things in the UK, and he was head of the Labour Party, and somehow fucking Boris Johnson beat him. It was so sad to see because, again, Boris Johnson is our equivalent of Trump. Some people say that he's better spoken. He's well spoken. I don't think so. I think he's a babbling idiot the same. But he just sounds maybe a bit more eloquent than Trump with his vocabulary. But he unfortunately managed to do the same. He managed to convince people with their right-wing propaganda, and he really led our country downhill a lot further than it was already.
Out of curiosity, I was in Buenos Aires when Milei was elected. Have you followed like that presidency at all, or any of his policies?
Yes, it is a very complex situation, not one that could easily comment on. I understand that there are some good things that he's done, but I understand that he has also raised poverty levels, for example, and he might be doing some things that are benefiting the Argentinian economy, but it is still isolating the most vulnerable people of society. And for young people, there are so many people who are still exploited, and he's not doing anything in the way for legal work, for example. Those aren't his priorities. He's not doing anything for the common worker. That's not his priority. His priority is fixing the economy, or stabilizing the economy. But that doesn't help the most vulnerable people of society. Maybe it will in 10, 15 years time. Maybe the situation for them will be a bit better. But that means that the most vulnerable people have to suffer for the next 10, 15 years to have a slight improvement in their quality of life. I don't know how fair that is. What about you? What are your thoughts?
Have you ever heard of the thought experiment, the veil of ignorance?
I don't think so, no.
All right, so close your eyes real quick.
Okay.
So just imagine that you're like a soul floating around the earth, just an amorphous Ben soul. Maybe you speak Spanish, who knows? But in this veil of ignorance, you don't have any identity. So you have no gender, you have no first language, you have no country of origin, you have no sexual orientation, you have nothing. You're just an amorphous human potential. And then you see the entire world. So you see rural Bolivia, you see Argentina, you see the United States, you see Russia, you see all the world. And God tells you you're going to be born. But before you go into the world, you can change the policies on Earth so that when you're born into the world, you're born into a more fair upbringing. Because I was born into Orange County, California, to two loving parents, great economically. I'm 6'4". Things have been pretty good for Spencer. And if I had to choose like a body to be born into, I would choose mine 10 out of 10, like 100%. But if I was a random soul floating around the world and I saw the potential to be Spencer, or I saw the potential to be someone with a learning disability in rural Bolivia, or I saw myself as being a laborer in Argentina, I would want the world to be more fair. I would want things to be more egalitarian. I would want my life in, rural Africa, say, to be at least similar to life in Orange County, which is a very idealistic thing to say, but of course, that's not the reality of the world. So you can open your eyes, and the idea with the veil of ignorance is we should form our political beliefs based on that presumption or that thought experiment. And obviously, it's easier said than done, but that's why I didn't vote for Trump. Is I thought someone like Bernie Sanders, for example, would lead to a more equal world for people in the United States and internationally.
Someone like that is never going to pass through the right wing destruction. The right wing media is always going to destroy those people who really want to make change.
Even I mean, like you said, we don't really have a left wing in the United States. People say, "Oh, the leftists," but if you look at an actual political spectrum, we have the far right, and then Democrats are right of center.
Yeah.
What's the most liberal policy that Kamala Harris or Joe Biden really put forward? It wasn't. And having a two-party system makes it really difficult too, because it's either Republican or Democrat. We don't really truly have a Green Party that has power. We don't really truly have a socialist party. It's a two-party system, and so it's sort of an all or nothing thing, unfortunately.
Yes. Well, I know we could keep talking about politics, and I'm sure we would have a very interesting conversation, but I think we will come to the end here for today. So I am of the understanding that you would like to ask me a question before I ask you the last ones.
Sure thing. So, I went from North Carolina to Los Angeles on this Greyhound bus. And then I went from Guatemala down to Argentina, something like 15 countries in total. And I've talked to religious leaders, and I've talked to all kinds of people. And so my question for you to be interview number 100, Ben, is from your perspective, if we as people could live in universal brotherhood with one or another, if we could have a more humane and loving world, what do you think it is we'd have to do to bring that world about? How can we live more in universal brotherhood as people?
Well, I think I would jump to the age-old think global, act local. I think that we have to make the changes ourselves because it's clear that those changes don't happen from above. And when I say above, I'm referring to the politics. I'm not referring to a higher power in this situation. So I think that we have to treat others the way that we would like to be treated. Try and do something good in the world every day. Be that pay a compliment to someone or pick a piece of rubbish off the ground, and tell someone that you love them, and give someone a hug. Let someone know that you're there if they need you. Cook for someone. I think just if we can do one thing every day, one thing that has a positive impact on the world, I think the world would be a much better place.
Yeah, I think your project's a reflection of that. I mean, giving people the chance to actually speak, bringing an international community together. I think that's something that you're doing.
I guess so. And have you answered this yourself? Have you given your thoughts on this question yourself?
Yeah, I have. I think the best answer I have is the action of, going through North, South, Central America, connecting to lots of different people. I think the most important thing that we can do is talk to people who are different than us. So, for example, talking to people who have housing difficulty, talking to people who really support Trump, like who really love him, talking to people who are atheistic or agnostic, and trying to see the best in them as well, which is often a really hard thing to do. Um, I by nature tend to actually be more judgmental than I think most people would assume. And so sometimes it's a struggle to see the best in people, but the spark of divinity lives in all of us. I see that, as a Christian soul, for example, but there's something about us that's all connectedly human. And so whatever we can do to connect to that and to cherish that common humanity. And I think what you're saying goes along with that. I mean, what is something I can do to help myself, the world, and my community? Think globally, act locally. Beautiful.
Hmm. Very nice, very nice. Do you have any other questions you want to throw at me before I ask you my last three?
Um, no, I think we've covered some really cool things, some really interesting stuff. Hopefully I'll be in Europe in June or July, so maybe I'll hit you up then. Um, I don't know how things are going to work with my visa, but I would want to do part of El Camino de Santiago, so I'll hit you up then and maybe we can get together, have a recommendation. But for now, I'm good.
Yeah, sounds good. I would love to do another episode in person with you. I'm sure we'll be able to make that work. You'll be there around that time, the European summer. So I'll see you over there, over the pond. So the last three questions for you today. The question from the last guest was, where do you see yourself in 10 years' time?
10 years time. So I'll be 40. Cool. Okay. So I wake up at 7 in the morning and I immediately pray and meditate. I go brush my teeth and take a shower and head off to work. I finished my PhD degree 2 years ago, and I have 250 interviews for my project Love John Cooper. So throughout the day, I go to teach a class at a local university, and then I do a podcast about my 250 interviews. Then I come home to my loving partner, and we go to a church service together. We have dinner with my brother Evan and his partner. Then we go stargazing at night. And I'm really happy because I'll be going to, let's see, would be a cool place. Going to Madrid, sure, to do a conference in 3 weeks.
Wow, very specific. We'll have to check up in December 2034.
Vamos a ver, let's see, yeah.
Vamos a ver. So you think that you will just be missing one big trip to do your last 50?
I think I'll get 50 interviews. So let's see, Europe, and these are rough categories, like the idea of, but Europe, Asia, North America, South America, Africa. I guess where do you throw the Middle East and all that, but I think
What does
I'll have
and
those 250 interviews.
Australasia? Do you count Australasia as Asia?
That's where it gets complicated, right? Like, is India part of Asia? Is Istanbul part of Asia, or is it part of Europe? It gets interesting.
Russia too.
Oh, Russia. Well, the fascinating thing is you could just do 50 interviews in the different states of the United States, 50 states, right? So the content idea is really a rough estimation of how do we delineate these different, um, geographic or political areas.
Hmm. And even Asia itself is, like you say, so big. It's such a big population.
Oh, huge.
What question would you like to ask the next guest?
Hmm. Okay, so here's the question. Imagine that a genie waved a wand over your head and suddenly you had unlimited confidence for the next month. What are 3 things that you would do that you haven't done in your life now that you have unlimited confidence?
Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
Okay.
And finally, what message would you like to share in your language?
Like and subscribe to Ben's wonderful podcast. Go add me on Instagram and like all my pictures as well. Hopefully, I'll have all 50 uploaded in the next few months here. But on a serious note, I would say encourage your friend with something you know they're experiencing. So if you do have a friend who's going through starting a podcast, ask them genuinely, because I can guarantee you they've put hours and hours into that thing, and many people haven't actually asked them about it. Or if you know a friend is in a breakup or starting a new relationship, just dedicate an hour to ask them about that specifically. And do the same for yourself. Just take yourself out for coffee for an hour, sit by yourself for an hour, write down the 3 biggest things that are happening in your life and reflect about them. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to your story? Does it help you? Does it hurt you? How do you feel about it?
Very nice. Very, very good. Now you bring that up, I think those messages at the end are something that I really like to reflect on. Like you mentioned before, what have I learned about myself? And I guess it's about listening, that I can listen. But I really like the messages that people have to share at the end. So thank you for the promotion there, and thank you for your message.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Thank you everyone for listening. I know we're going on for 2 hours again, but it's been a great time, and hopefully we can do another episode in person. So thank you for listening to episode 20 of Backpacks and Stories.